to the cloud. Okay. So you've got some folks from everywhere from Colorado to Montana to Minnesota. You got folks from all over here to hear about reviewing records and being a verifier.
All right, so like Joe said, I'm Rebecca Wallace. I'm the EDDMapS coordinator here at the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health, and I'm going to talk about reviewing records and being an EDDMapS verifier. So kind of the first kind of idea is records coming in. How do records come in? They need to appear for a verifier to have something to do. So there are kind of three broad ways data comes in. You can see on our homepage, there's a tab at the top for report a sighting. So websites, including embedded forms in some of our partner websites, one by one, or in some cases, if we're working with groups that have very fancy forms, these records will come in through the website. We also have records that come in through our smartphone apps. Most of our smartphone records are coming in now via the EDDMapS app, the EDDMapS Pro app, and we still have a good amount of data coming in the I've Got One app. And then we're also going to have a conference, I believe next month, talking about the wild spotter program and the invasives-free USA concept. So we're hoping to get more and more data coming in through the wild spotter program. And then the last way that data gets into our system is the bulk upload. So we work with different partners. Sometimes they have a lot of historical data and they want data to come in. Rather than entering it in one by one through the website, they'll send in files or sometimes entire geodatabases, and I'll work with them on getting that data in. So regardless, we get a few different ways data comes in, and almost always that data needs to be reviewed by someone, just someone who can take a second look at that data, even if it's coming from a really reputable source, and say, yeah, that looks right, or, hey, something's off about this photo, this location, whatever. So that's where our verifiers come in. If you are not a verifier, or you want to promote someone to be a verifier, that can be done through the My EDDMapS page. And then on the left here, there is a tab for request to be a verifier. So if you click on that, you can request to be a verifier for yourself, or there's a toggle here for requesting on behalf of another person. So you're essentially saying, hi, I'm, the manager of this program, but I'd like my biologist, land manager, steward, whatever, to be a verifier. And then you would fill out this form, either again on behalf of yourself or on behalf of someone else. Including references is very helpful. That way we can, have some idea of, having this, who this person is. And then you submit that, and it will go to a table for admins, manage verifier requests, and this is where we see the requests that have come in. And you see some of these are, already dealt with. Some of them they're still pending, depending on who the person is. I am not the only person who manages these. We do have some states that have what we call verifier admins. They have the ability to add people as verifiers. If you are a verifier admin, thank you for helping us out with this. It's really helpful to have local verifier admins because we don't know everybody, but often there's a state, state organization that helps other people network with, the groups within their state, so they get to know the people in the state. So some of these I've dealt with, and some of these they've, other admins have worked on. When a verifier is, we look at, so we'll just look at here, this is the information that was provided in the request. And then when a decision has not yet been made, we click on that and we have the opportunity to contact that person, to reject it, or to accept it. You'll see at the top here that accepting a request does not add that account as a verifier. That has to be done through another page. The reason for that is that the parameters that are requested either may not be the ones that are ultimately used. So sometimes people might say they want to be a verifier for only a county when it really makes more sense for them to be a state level verifier, or there may need, in conversation with them, we may figure out that, they have, instead of plants, they really only care about aquatic plants. So we need to tailor the parameters a little bit better for what will work best for the verifier and for, the state and overall EDDMapS. So that's where we have this verifier manage page, and you can click on the verifier manage page to go there, or it's also under that admin tools again, so manage verifier. So you can go straight there a couple different ways. So if I click on verifier manage, it'll take me to this form, and at the top we recently added a how to add a verifier PDF so that our verifier admins can know how to interact with this page as best as possible. So you can add one or more verifiers. The most programs won't have user group as an option. It's mainly in Minnesota, and some other couple other programs have user group as a factor. Again, project, it's not going to be as big of a thing, but if you are working with a group that or adding someone, or you only want to interact with data coming in from a particular project, that is an option. Country defaults to United States, but we do have, our partners in Canada that we work with, and we can expand out to other countries as well, if they want to participate. State or province. And then again, county, if they are going to be like a county lead coordinator, or they're part of a SISMA that has a number of counties they interact in, you can select counties. So if I just pick, let's say, California here, we can add multiple counties that they may have, responsibilities within. You can also further narrow that down by what we call division. It's the largest kind of umbrella for diseases, which includes bacteria, nematodes, fungi, and some other things that kind of fall under the umbrella concept of diseases. Insects, which is really kind of, to a degree, insects, mites, ticks, things that spiders, things that fall in there that average person would say, oh, that's an insect. Plants, kind of obvious what plants are, and then wildlife covers your mammals, reptiles, amphibians, things along those lines. Categories get more specific down. So like I mentioned earlier, maybe someone only cares about aquatic plants. Maybe we have a lot of people in Florida that deal specifically in like reptiles. So that's where these categories can come into play. And then species. So we do have some groups that are very species specific, or they only cover, say, like a noxious plant list or things like that. So that's where you can add specific species. These three concepts, division, category, species, they are independent of each other. So if you're going to add someone as, say, a Phragmites verifier, you're not going to add them as plants, aquatic plants, and then Phragmites. You're just going to add them as Phragmites. Otherwise, they're going to get all the plants anyway. The next thing we look at is verifier for first reports only. So this is if a record would be the first verified record of that subject, species, whatever, in a county, they'll get those. So if, say, Jorospiders is reported, we're starting to get reports for Jorospiders in Tifton. If someone is a first report verifier for Jorospiders either in Tifton specifically or say Georgia, they'll get, say, 10 reports, and then the first one that's verified, the other 9 disappear. So they're only going to have access to what would be potentially the first report of that subject in that county. So we do have some people who only are concerned with, you know, the emerging species, range expansion species, things like that. And then verifier for regulated species. So you can look on our tools page and look at the subjects that are considered regulatory species. And if you are adding someone, or if you are a person who should be a regulatory verifier, then that's the checkbox that needs to be checked for being able to review for, say, Kogon grass, or for you know, Asian longhorn beetle, things like that. You need to be have regulatory verifier added. And that covers even if you're adding someone for that individual species. If I'm adding someone as an Asian longhorn beetle verifier, we still need to check that box. And again, you can look up those species on the tools page. When you add someone, you are adding them, you know, if I add a bunch of people or a bunch of counties, a bunch of parameters, they're going to be added in each combo. That way, there's the ability to remove some aspects of a person's verifier status. We do have people who occasionally say, you know, okay, I'm not a verifier in that county anymore, but I'm still a verifier in these other counties. Or maybe their job responsibilities went from, you know, they're covering all of the invasive species. Now they're just covering maybe just plants, things like that. We can more easily, you know, edit and remove people as for certain parameters. So that's what the, you know, adding a verifier looks for. And if you want to, you know, I mentioned removing people with either entirely or specific parameters that they may have, you would select it on the right and then click delete selected verifiers. You can also search for the, you know, them in this box, things like that. A verifier admin. So I'm a system admin. I get to see everybody. A verifier admin is usually state-based, and they're only going to see the verifiers in their state. So they don't have any ability to add people outside of their state. They don't have the ability to remove or even really see the table for anybody that's not in their state. So that's where a verifier admin kind of has their area of responsibility is within their state or states. So that's adding a verifier. So then, as a verifier, you can get to, once you've been added as a verifier, you're automatically signed up, and I'm answering this, Matthew, right at this point. So as a verifier, you're automatically signed up for instant alerts. If you want to change that, you go to My Profile, and you click on Edit Profile, and towards the, where is it? Verifier email preference. You're automatically signed up for instant alerts. You can change that to digest. What that will do is, it will, instead of getting an email every single time a record comes in that fits your verifier parameters, you're going to get an email every 4 hours that are all the records in the last 4 hours that have been added that fit your verifier parameters. It's more of a summary of each record instead of a full record, but that way, you know, if you know, hundreds of records have been added, you're not going to get hundreds of emails, you'll get a couple emails. So you can switch that to digest, and that should help out if you're getting too many emails all at once. We don't have a way to opt out of emails entirely, but you can switch to the digest, and again, it'll reduce the number of emails that you're going to be receiving for us, specifically related to to being a verifier. Then, so as a verifier, there's, like I said, there's a couple different ways to get to reviewing a record. There are, I should have had this pulled up already, my apologies. I am signed up for the digest. So what I see looks like this. Oh, clicked off of it, my apologies. So I see a little bit of information about each record. And then, I can scroll down, see a little bit of information about each record. And then I can click one of three things. I can review the record online. I can view this one record. It takes me straight to this record to review it. Or I can claim this record so that I can look at it again later. So if I click on review records online, it opens the review records tab. Or sorry, it opens a tab on my browser. It opens a review records page. The other way I can get to this is, again, under the admin tools in the My EDDMapS section, I can click on review records. It takes me straight to that page as well. So let me just click off some of these. So if I go to this review records page, in the top right, there are some links. In the top left, there's some filtering options. In the kind of center of the page, there's more filtering options. There's a search box on the right there that allows you to kind of search everything if what you're needing to look for isn't to be found in the other filtering options. You can select how many records you'd like to see at one time in the table. You can sort any of these columns, least to most, most to least, A to Z, Z to A. You can click on the number. It will take you to review that particular record. You can hover over the images to see a preview of what that image looks like, to kind of get a quick idea of what's going on there. If you click on the, let me narrow this down a little bit. If you click on the name of the person, you get a little bit of information about them, including if they filled out organization, what their email address is, and if they provided a telephone number. You can see the location of the record, the dates associated with it, and the review status, and if anybody has claimed that record. So that gives you a brief overview of the records that you as a verifier are allowed to review. So someone, I can answer this pretty quickly. Does changing the categories for a verifier have any impact on previously verified data by that verifier? The answer to that is no. It doesn't have any effect. So if they, had a status in the past, it still applies to those records that were reviewed by them in the past. It doesn't negate anything, because a lot of times it's simply a matter of someone changing jobs. It's not that they were necessarily, shouldn't have been a verifier in the first place. It's more that they moved to another state, they moved to another county, they moved to another position that doesn't necessarily have the same responsibilities the previous one had. So changing the categories later does not have an effect on the previously reviewed records. For state verifiers, that one person who administers those verifiers for the state for verifying all categories. A state verifier is just I can review all records in that state. That's what I'm meaning when I'm saying state verifier. So they're anyone who has the ability to review a record can. So if we look at just kind of getting off on a tangent a little bit here, if we look at there on the tools page, there's report verifier lookup. If I click on that and I type in Burmese Python, and I move that to around Miami, Florida, You're going to see a lot of people are allowed to review a Burmese Python record in Florida. Some of these people are county level verifiers, some of them are state level verifiers. Any one of them can review a Burmese Python record that comes into Miami-Dade County, Florida. So if you're talking about, so the verifier admin is the person who can add verifiers for that state, but a state level verifier is just someone who can review records as statewide. So let's just go quickly back to this particular table here. So if I want to review a record, I'll click on the number for that record. It opens in a new tab. It provides me a little bit of information about the person. So the top option here is what is publicly viewable. And so the public will see, this was reported by Chuck Bargeron, University of Georgia. The reported by, and this information below it, that's what you can see as a verifier. If Chuck was reporting anonymously, this up here would just say something like EDDMapS reporter. You as the verifier would still see that person's name because that gives you additional information. Sometimes you know who that person is, you know their qualifications. You as a verifier can also see their email address. Again, that can allow you to contact them, especially in situations of, this is a regulatory species, this is a high priority species, or just there's something odd about this record. You reported a summer species in the winter, you have a completely unassociated photo, attached to it. So maybe we can get the photo that should have been associated with it, things like that. You are allowed to contact the reporter. And to do so, we provide you their email address. And then if they included a phone number, you can see that phone number. Any information associated with the record is viewable by you, including the if they provided coordinates, you will be able to see those even if they're saying the record should be private. So the coordinates should be hidden from the public. You as a verifier will potentially need to see those to help in reviewing that record. If someone's reporting an aquatic species in the middle of a parking lot, you need to be able to have that information to help make your decision. Their photos are associated with it are just above the map. And so you can click on those and see those. And actually, and this is something that I did, when I was reviewing Jorospider records recently, is that sometimes people will go around and take pictures of all the spiders they think could be a Jorospider. And in some cases, they weren't. They might have had one or two photos that were Jorospiders, and then the rest of them were some other spider. So in that case, yes, they in fact did accurately, report a Jorospider, and I removed the records of other, native spiders. So you as a verifier have this delete image option. Be very careful with that. But you can delete images. You can rotate images if they're oriented incorrectly. You have a little bit of power there. When I removed a record, I did note it in my review section that I removed records of native species. So, for transparency, that's something I do, and it's something I recommend. Below the map, you'll see record review history and discussion. You can go through there and see what has happened, what has changed, if photos were added, if photos were requested by other verifiers, anything that happens, you can see. This message for other verifiers section, it really is just going to the verifiers. The reporter, nobody else is going to see this. It just is for this verifier section. So if you want to say, hey, I'm working with this person, hey, I'm following up on this, it will just show up here. It's not going to the reporter. They will not see that information. There's been a little confusion in the past about this. I just want to say this isn't being emailed out to anybody, even other verifiers. It's just kind of a whiteboard right there for you to post a message. And then below that is the section for affecting some sort of change. You can claim a record, which just signals to other people, hey, I'll handle the communication about this record. You can upload additional images. So if they emailed them to you, if you went out and did a site visit, if you have images that should be associated with this record somehow, you can add them. If you click on that, it looks exactly like the adding an image as through the website. You can defer. So if you say, okay, well, I'm going out to that area next week anyway, you can click defer and send yourself a message for the future and pick a date and the message you want to send yourself, and it will send it as an email to you. You can request images. So in this case, you know, Chuck said this is a box elder. He uploaded a picture of a water bottle. I can say, Chuck, I need some images of actually a box elder. So you can request images. It'll just be a little pop-up to kind of confirm you want to request images. And it will send them an email with a link to the record to edit it, to add additional images. You can request additional information. So again, if the date looks wrong, if the location looks wrong, if something else is going on, you can request additional information and it'll pop up this message box. And as you can see, they're going to receive an email. Your message will be documented in the message for other verifier section, but anything beyond that is just between you and the in the reporter, because there could be some sort of privacy stuff going on, and we don't want, you know, to deal with that. That's not part of what we're kind of needing. That we don't need that information. So any further correspondence will be between you and the reporter. It won't be documented in our system. So it'll send them an email with the message you included, and when they respond, it should go to you as the verifier. It's not going to go on the message board. It's not going to go to anybody else. The next two buttons are change subject and make record negative. If I click change subject, if I say this is in fact not a box elder, this is something else, some other invasive species, I can change that and it'll document the change on the record. I can from there either go then to complete the review of the record with review and release, or review and don't release, or if for some reason I don't want to review it at that time, I can save and exit. If I click this button by mistake, I can cancel it. Make record negative, if I click on that, I can say, this is in fact not a box elder, but I want to record that they attempted to find a box elder. This is really great for zebra mussels, Asian longhorn beetle, emerald ash borer, Kogon grass, things like that, where you don't want to delete their record. You want to say someone looked for that species and did not find it, because in the next year or the year after, it may start to be found in that area. And so you have an idea of people were looking for it and not finding it. So it probably didn't invade before, too much longer before it was found. You can, again, go from making the record, you know, change the record to negative and then review and release, and then review and don't release. You can save and exit if you don't want to review it at that time. Then again, you can cancel. The next three options are, imagine this, review and release, review and don't release. And release means make the record public. So you can review the record and not make it public, or you can review the record and make it public. And then there's the delete record option. So in this case, delete would be a good option for this particular record. He reported a box elder. It's a picture of a water bottle. It's obviously some sort of test record. Another reason you might delete a record is it is a report of just an introduced species that doesn't seem to have much impact, but but it's actually a bad report. It's of a native species. You're not documenting that native species, that introduced species. There has no value for a negative record of it. So if someone reported a dandelion, they're introduced species of dandelions, it's not a dandelion, it's a native aster. Nobody's really keeping track of negative dandelion records. We're not monitoring for that native species. That's where delete record can come into play. If we select delete, remember the record cannot be undone by the verifier. Be sure you want to delete this record, and you need to add a comment to let the reporter know why you're deleting it. If we click continue, it would delete Chuck's record. So review and release and review and don't release, as I mentioned, the only difference between those at this level is making the record public or not. The form looks exactly the same. I'm going to show you review and don't release because it has one more option in identification credibility than the review and release does. So there's a number of fields in here. Only 3 are required. Reviewed by is required, and you can see it automatically filled out my name. Verification method is required, and identification credibility is required. Everything else is an optional field. It automatically filled out my name, but I can change that. So if you have an account that is used by multiple people, you can have each person put their own name in, or if for some reason someone else is reviewing the record in your account, which that would be kind of odd, you can again change the name. Verification method. So reporter expertise. I know Chuck. Chuck knows how to ID a box elder. If there were no photos, if I knew nothing else, I would say, yes, Chuck knows how to ID a box elder. That would be the reporter's expertise. Photographs is I looked at the photograph and it was accurate. Verifier expertise. I have been to that location. I know that species is there. We're relying upon my expertise as the verifier to say this is correct. Specimens are, imagine this, specimens, voucher specimens. Those were specimens that went to a herbarium or museum. And same with voucher photograph, diagnostic lab sample that's really used by people in the disease type categories. So it was sent to a diagnostic lab and they evaluated it. Those are kind of the basic verification methods. Identified by, and if someone else identified it for you. Identification credibility. This is where you make your decision. It's possible it's correct, it's credible it's correct, it's verified, it's absolutely it. And then in review and don't release, you have unable to confirm. I can't say it is or it isn't it. I'm going to say for now I can't confirm it, and it will at least get it out of the review queue. Report source ID, so you can say, is this from the general public? Is this from a government agency, nonprofits, so forth? It's an optional field. You can note where the record kind of comes from. Make private, so this again covers the coordinates. If Chuck had said, I want this record to be private, it would already be selected yes. So it's currently set to no. If for some reason I thought, oh, I need to make this coordinate private, I don't want the public to know exactly where this is for some reason, I can move it to yes as the verifier. And then we have 2 comments fields. The reviewer comments are just for the other verifiers, and they also are available to the reporter. The public comments go on the public record for this record. So again, if I'm removing bad photos or photos that are just not of the subject, I can say non-Jora spider photos were removed. Once I've made my decision, I would click submit and I'm done with the record. It's a long way around saying, this is how you review a record. Most verifiers can review a record within, under a minute. They can look at the location, they can look at the photos, they can look at the reporter, they can look at that information and make a decision. Or it becomes very quickly obvious that they need more information, more photos, whatever, and they can ask for that. So it doesn't usually take very long to look at the information associated with a record and review it. There are some outliers where, you know, it's species that are really hard to ID from photos, things like that. But for the most part, it's a quick process. The last thing I want to cover real quick is if we go back to the review records page, at the top, you can see view your recently reviewed records, view all recently reviewed records. That's within your parameters. Reviewed but not public records, deleted records, unable to confirm records. Those are all things you can go back and like, I want to look at that again. I want to just double check my work, someone else's work, things like that. But there's also this link up here to triage iNaturalist records. If we click on that, we are pulling data from iNaturalist. We're pulling research grade records. And these are the same parameters of you as a verifier that you have access to. There's a few filtering options. You can hide the natives, and that's nativity to the US. You can look for specific species lists. If your state noxious weed list is there, things like that. You can sort by, you know, if you're a verifier for all records in a state, you can limit to plants, insects, diseases, and so forth. You can flip between if you're looking at all the records in a state or looking at records in county by county. You can search for specific things. I will say I recommend everyone subscribe to receive emails. This is a separate email system, and that way you can be notified when more records come in that fit your parameters that you are allowed to triage. And if we look at the table, it's structured similarly to the review records table. You have your location, you have your reporter, common name, you have scientific name, so you can see that. Nativity to the US, the new records for that reporter, in this case, they're all from iNaturalist, in that location. If we have existing verified records in the EDDMapS database for that species in that location, it will tell you in that field. And then is it appearing on a regulatory list or law? You can, again, sort by all kinds of things, filtering. The difference is, so let's scroll down a little bit, get some introduced stuff here. Click on the combination, the row, and it behaves more like the bulk option, which I just realized I didn't show you in the review records page. But you're saying for this whole set, this 10,000 records of each of these two species in those locations, I want to bulk verify, which means I'm trusting those records coming from that source. We're not going to independently review them. Or to verifiers, so I want to review these one by one, which it's going to be a lot in this case, 10,000 records of each of those. Or I want to ignore these. So I don't care about house sparrows in Texas. We already kind of know they're everywhere, and maybe, you know, we don't need that data in EDDMapS. So I will say that bulk verify to verifiers, it's not an immediate thing. In this case, we know exactly this much information. There are 10,000 records of buttercup oxalis in California that we don't have from iNaturalist. It will take a while to go out and actually grab the whole record. So it's not an immediate thing. You're not immediately going to see it show up on the maps. You're not immediately going to see it show up in the review records page. To bulk review in the normal review records table, it's this little checkbox on the left again, and you're selecting, again, individual records, and you can say possible or credible. You can add your report source ID, reviewer comments, public comments, release it to the public, not release it to the public, and do you want those to be private or not private? And then you'd click submit, and it makes the record for this. Anytime you're bulk verifying, either in this system or in the triage system, be very careful that you're not accidentally bulk verifying records with subjects like unknown plant, unlisted insect, things like that. We get that occasionally. And then we also have people who are testing or demoing for people. And so you really need to pay attention to the images that are uploaded to make sure they're not images of water bottles. So just be very careful when you're bulk verifying either in the triage system or in the review record system. One other thing I will note, so in the top right, we do have fact sheets associated with this system. So triage fact sheet and a specific iNaturalist triage info. With iNaturalist, a record, a research grade record has greater than 2/3 of the identifications agreeing on the subject. You have, and it has to be species or finer, so species or subspecies, variety, so forth. And that it's a wild subject. Now, the wild subject gets certain species kind of in trouble. Not everybody is marking when the subject is planted, in the case of plants. So you will run into crepe myrtles, English ivy, Nandina, ligustrums, things like that, that are well-known invasives that are not being marked as planted when they are. So with those types of records, I always say to verifiers for Georgia, because I'm only going to kind of restrict myself to certain states. I'll say to verifiers because 8 of 10 records of Nandina are planted and they're not marked as planted coming from iNaturalist. So you have to be really careful. And I do know at least one state has had an effort, maybe in the past, maybe it's still a current effort, that they are going to iNaturalist and going through those certain types of species and marking them as planted in iNaturalist, so they never even come to EDDMapS. So just be really careful with species you know are commonly planted, things like that. So that's kind of, I went a little bit longer than I wanted, but there's a lot going on. I really wanted to make sure that I went over, especially the triage system. I think we can use more people looking at the triage system. So we've got several questions. So can you show how to do the reporter only filter? For some reason that never works on my dashboard. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know in what context that was. So I don't know if that's in the verifier manage page or in the maybe filtering by reporter.
I think when they were on the review page is about when that came up. They were asking,
Okay.
how do I, like,
Filter by
how do you
report?
select Chuck is the question that was coming up.
Sorry. So, so we type in at least part of someone's name. So I can never remember Joe if you're Joe, or if you're Joseph, you're Joseph. And so then you pick the right person you're looking for. And we added in the email addresses for people because sometimes there's not really that many Joe LaForests out there, but there might be several Rebecca Wallaces, spelled all kinds of different ways for Rebecca. So if we click on that, that gives us this particular person. So in this case, Joe has, 7 or so records. If you want multiple people, you can keep adding people. So if you are wanting to review, say, a group of volunteers that went out and looked for stuff, you can add those 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever volunteers.
And
so you do have to click on the person to add them.
We also, this is using logic of you're only going to get reporter if in the current view you're on, that reporter is there. So if Mark Brentz hasn't currently sent in a report in the queue I'm in, I'm never going to see his name there. So it could be that other filters.
That's not true.
That's not true? I'm lying? Oh man.
Well, I know that
I don't give this presentation.
Well, the other day I accidentally, and I do this too, I had too many parameters. And so I had species, I was looking for unlisted, unknown, things like that. I could still add you even though you don't have unlisted, unknown. It just results in a 0.
Yeah.
So you can still look for people who don't have reports. All right, so if you are a state level verifier, do you receive notification automatically if when new verifiers are added for that state or other jurisdiction? No, we don't just send out emails when people are added as verifiers. We don't send them out to other verifiers. And like I was saying previously, so even if I'm going to add a verifier, I'm talking to our partners in the states that we have strong partnerships and projects with. So almost never am I going to add someone for like Minnesota, because they're on it. They're in charge of things and they're doing an excellent job. If I get an email for Florida, I'm going to forward that email to the appropriate person in Florida that should be potentially adding people. Now, if I get an email from someone in Kansas, we have people we talk to in Kansas, so we might say, hey, do you know this person? But we're ultimately going to be the ones to add them as verifiers. So for the most part, someone in the state that we're working with is likely going to be contacted, but we're not sending out an email to anybody else in the state that is a verifier. I noticed that when I redirect a sample to another division, I no longer have access to that ID sample, even when I know what that sample is. I take it someone else will pick up that sample. Should I make some notes as to what it may be before sending the sample to another division? Do you mean subject? So that's the.
I think
we do occasionally get where someone will report, say, tree of heaven instead of spotted lanternfly. So that would go to another whole taxonomic system, and you may not be a verifier for, say, insects in that state. So in that case, and it has happened occasionally where it's like, if you're a species level verifier, if you change it to another subject, another species, you may not have access to it any longer. So that sometimes does happen. And in that case, yeah, it does eventually, it moves over, and the people who now have the parameters for that subject or for that record, they'll, it'll be in their review queue.
Yep. And he clarified that also at the bottom too, with and you did answer his question.
Okay. Okay, so change a subject to a non-native species that isn't an EDDMapS. So you do have a couple different options. So again, going back to the concept, someone reported dandelion, it's an introduced species, but it's actually a native aster species. You can potentially change the subject if the subject exists. We don't have every single, subject that, a biological subject that exists. You can change it. The question is it useful to do so? Our database is pretty focused on invasive, introduced, pest, and biocontrol species. We don't have a robust, what will end up is if we do change it to that native aster, we're going to have a map with one record on it, which is a little odd. So some states, some programs do have their protocols for how they want to handle these types of situations. What I broadly say is, are you changing it to a useful subject? So if you're going from something like Kogong grass to Johnson grass, both of those are invasive species. It makes a lot of sense to change it to from Kogong to Johnson grass. If it would be Kogong grass to a native like foxtail species, it's more useful to keep that as a negative Kogong grass record, in my opinion, because again, someone looked for Kogong grass and they didn't find it. It gives you some information about people are looking for it, what species they might be misidentifying it as, things like that. But deleting a record comes into play very well with test records, with species that aren't useful at all as native species, or as negative records of a highly cosmopolitan, highly widespread, you know, introduced species. So it just kind of use your best judgment, and potentially see if the program you're working with decides on a protocol to go with. What are common reasons to not make a record public? There are, so if you can't confirm what it is, it automatically has to be not public. There's also situations where it's a regulatory species or a high profile species, high priority species, something like that, where you know it's correct, but there may be things you need to get in place before you tell the public, hey, we have this. Maybe there's an eradication program that needs to be decided on. Maybe you need to get signage out. Maybe you need to come up with some sort of plan. Maybe you need to talk and get your press release together. Maybe you need to get the appropriate people involved in your state so that everyone knows what's going on and they aren't caught off guard. So there may be reasons to not make a record public, even if it is correct, for a short amount of time. So you can basically just get your ducks in a row and then say, hey, we've got this and here's what we're doing about it.
We've also had the case of, we work with academics. They're fun people. We like them. They'll sometimes be collecting data as part of a project, and they have a group that's kind of looking at stuff privately, and they're planning to publish on that. And they don't really want to have all that data out there until that's been published. Different groups, different policies for how they're releasing data and controlling when the public can see it.
All right, so can you go over when exactly coordinates should be hidden, made private? It's usually relating to kind of one of maybe three things. One is it's private land, and you don't want people trying to go on that private land. It's also possible there are some situations where there's poaching, either of that introduced species, or if there's other sensitive species or sensitive habitat in the background. So if someone's reporting, a tallow tree in a pitcher plant bog, you don't want people to necessarily go out there and either tromp all over those pitcher plants or, maybe try to poach the pitcher plants. And then there's also, like Joe was saying, it may be associated with some sort of research program. So in a lot of those cases, the reporter is going to say, hey, I already want this to be private. So they'll have marked private as positive, as yes already with their record. But you as a verifier do have the opportunity to change private if you see something like that going on. Either it's sensitive area, sensitive location, sensitive plants in the background, things like that. Does EDDMapS feed back to iNaturalist? So I think we did notice, and Joe or Chuck, I think one of you noticed first, that there is some sort of notification on iNaturalist for this record is in EDDMapS. Is that correct?
Yeah, we provided a service back to them so they could easily pull a list of any records. We mark what their ID is, we tell them what our ID is, and you can actually then click from iNaturalist to EDDMapS and from EDDMapS back. We aren't doing anything in terms of using the API to actually put annotations on the original iNaturalist records as one more thumbs up. That's been discussed, as well as, if something is going to be, maybe not correct. Further integration is something we're discussing and just finding the time to work on things like that.
Yeah. And I will say that we don't regularly check back at this point with the iNaturalist record to see if the status has changed. So there are some times, and I've done this with iNaturalist records, I look at like a record that might be a year, 2 years old, I might come across it and say, oh, that was misidentified. So we are not doing a regular check back to see if a status has changed on the records that we've pulled in. And that's something that we do want to do in the future. We just haven't built that in yet. I missed how you get to the iNaturalist triage info. What tab are they on? So I'm on the review records page right now. There is a link right here at the top, triage iNaturalist records. There's also, if we go to, so I'm just going to go back to, this is my EDDMapS. This is the landing page for my EDDMapS. If I click on admin tools, I see triage system. That's the same thing. If I click on that, it takes me to the triage system, which right now is iNaturalist records only, but we would like to add other services as we can form those relationships.
I'll
Question
answer this
about.
So the question about someone was signed up for alerts and they're signed up for alerts in Montana, and they were suddenly getting some interesting alerts coming back out in Mexico. When we added Mexico into some of what we were doing, there was a query that was a bit off. The records you're getting really are in Montana. However, the name that was being applied to it, because some of the identifiers in the background were similar, are actually the same, but weren't taking into account country. That's why that was causing an issue. I'm actually talking with our developers on another channel over here that will have you fixed by the end of the day. We thought we had caught all the places, but you have found one more where apparently that needed to be corrected. So thank you for providing feedback. It's how we make these systems better.
Yeah. Most of the records in the queue are people whose names I don't recognize. Generally safe to assume such reporters are members of the general public. How carefully do you generally check their possible credentials? So because anybody can report a record, again, it's right there on the website, report sightings, anybody can download the app to report. You can, again, look at the submitted by. So again, just because I don't want to necessarily look at anybody and everybody's information, I'll pick on Joe again. If I click on Joe's name, I can see what organization he says he's part of. I can see his email address, which tells me he, in fact, does work for the University of Georgia, and I can see a phone number. So if I take that information, I can say, okay, well, you know, are they just reporting from a Gmail address, or are they reporting from Yahoo address, versus are they reporting from a university address? We do have some people working for different companies, you know, a private company address. That gives you just a little bit extra information so that you can say, okay, you know, I'm going to go look up Joe LaForest. Is he qualified to be reporting this? If you really want to get into it, if you don't have photos, if you don't have any additional information, and you want to investigate that, it provides you that little bit of extra information. Additionally, you can email the person and get more information if you want to go that route as well. How does one know who else might be reviewing reports? So again, on that tools page, so if I go to tools and training and click on tools, I can then click on report verifier lookup, and I can say, you know, let's just say tallow tree, because that's, we're not, tallow tree. And if I move that to, let's say Massachusetts, I can see that these are the people who will get the notification to review the record. So you can see who's also potentially going to review. Now, not if I look at this, me being me, I know some of these people. I know Ian's probably not going to review this. Ian only cares about aquatic plants, but because he doesn't want to miss out on those like marginally aquatic plants that may not be tagged in our database as aquatic, he's going to make that decision on, do I want to review this tallow tree record? Again, he's probably not. Tallow tree is only, it's occasionally found in like ditches and wet places, but it's not really a typically thought of aquatic plant. So you can see, okay, you know, this person is going to potentially get that email. This person's going to get that email. This person's going to get that email, and so forth. Okay,
Well, and the
sometimes.
point you bring up about knowing when new verifiers are added is a good one. It's something we'll have to think about a little more because it's not necessarily even at a state level. If we suddenly add a new national verifier for Spider, do I need to email all verifiers who are currently doing anything with anything closely related to that, or the taxa in the group? Or it could be real interesting trying to figure out exactly who do I have to notify that someone might now be verifying these records. It's where we do encourage when those reports, when those things come in to request new verifiers, we try to make some introductions to form some community among the folks that are going to be doing that. So everyone's a little bit aware of each other. That's far more informal on case by case basis than something automated we can work out. But something definitely worth some more conversation and thought.
So, Joe, you may need to like Chuck the host.
I'm gonna hang out here a little longer till
Okay.
I can let my other call hang for a little bit.
Okay. All right. So sometimes the make private is already toggled to yes. The reporter decides whether or not they would like the coordinates to be public. Should you be changing these or not? So I think the general thing is that you kind of try to respect if the reporter already said, yes, I want my coordinates private. But we do give the verifier the opportunity to change that status. The most common thing would be for a verifier to go from a no to a yes. I don't know of many situations where they would, try to not respect what the reporter is already kind of saying, hey, I want this to be private. So you can't, I would say it's a lot easier to go from no to yes, and you're not going to get as much pushback from the reporter as if you tried to go from yes to no. And we do want to keep the reporters reporting, so you don't want to do too much to alienate them. Can you recommend preferred sources for synonym names of species as they change? How does this work with shifting names? IDIS. So Joe is our good thing you stuck around, Joe. Joe's one of the guys working on taxonomy.
So there are many sources for taxonomy out there. And for the taxonomy we use within EDDMapS, we don't try to be a taxonomist. We are citing where we are getting those names from. We are working with the national identifiers through USDA APHIS PPQ. We're working with other taxonomic experts to try to find not necessarily the name that was published last, because I do love it when taxonomists get into fights and they keep changing the name back and forth, but the name that's currently being used by individuals actually in the field. I can give you lots of different taxonomic resources that are out there. I am kind of impressed with what GBIF has done for some of that, because they brought things together, but they're showing you all the different places that a name has possibly been used by any authority, which doesn't always get you to a clear answer of, well, what name should I be using right now? What we end up doing on our side whenever a name does change, because it does happen, one of the fields in the database is originally reported as. So we always capture what the original report was in as. And then if there are taxonomic shifts, we end up adjusting that data and noting where the changes came from and what the new source for that taxonomy was. It's not something we do lightly, especially when you start considering some of the stuff we're looking at for not only regulated species, but state invasive lists and laws that we have listed in the system. Someone changes the taxonomy for something, and now you have to go update a state law. Ugh. Talk about painful. How long is that going to take? So it's an issue that we are constantly dealing with. And if you want to talk more on taxonomy, by all means, I'll drop our email address in the chat. Reach out. We're happy to talk one-on-one, especially when we're talking about specific names that get changed.
Yeah, we got an example of knotweed. Yes, we are very fond of Japanese knotweed and giant knotweed and so forth. So Joe, this one might be more for you. Suddenly received 70 pages worth of reports that were not triaged recently. Believe it was a system updated that generated location data that was otherwise left blank on coordinates. Would this be possible?
That sounds like an extremely specific case that I need to look at to find out your exact use case for what happened. Is something possible? I've been a developer on the system for 17 years now. Things generally work. I am occasionally surprised when somehow something works in. We'll take this into a Rebecca, you have that question somewhere so we can pull it out?
It's under answered.
Okay. Copy the details for that, send it to me, and I'll get with the developers. I've actually been chatting with them. The Mexico issue, that's been addressed. So that shouldn't be affecting your alerts. The joy of having instant chat with all of our developers while we're doing this.
Well, and knowing who the question was from an anonymous attendee, but knowing where they're located and who they are would help us track down what that was. It may have been that some bulk data went in and that was just an alert of the bulk data going in, or it could have been that we did an iNaturalist pool and there were a whole bunch of new records for your area, and that would have been an email that you would have gotten that would have had the species listed and where they were listed, and that could have been if you printed it 70 pages. So
yeah. Well, and the fun thing for us,
and there's the contact. Okay, good.
We've had to deal in the past with, hey, this happened, I got this email, what really happened? We actually save in the database all the emails that we send out to folks. Think about that for a moment. We actually go back through and I can go to the exact email that you received, see at it. I can track that back into the system that generated it. Typically things work well, but any IT system you've ever dealt with, there's always something that can be improved, and there could be a bug. Let's find it, let's fix it and get it working like we expect. So thank you for the feedback on that. We will be back in touch with you personally to make sure we have that addressed, because yeah, 70 pages ain't cool.
Do samples have an expiration date? If a diagnosis is not addressed in 2 years, will it eventually fall off the list? Or is the fact that I and my fellow entomologists can't identify an earthworm, will it remain in our list of entries, gasp, forever? So we do not have a roll off essentially, but if we go back to the review page, so if I, again, and
at this point, I'll leave you for my other call. I think
okay.
You've got the rest of the questions handled.
Yeah. So if I go to Joe's right here, and I see that, oh, this is from 2018. If I click on that and I go, okay, well, first of all, I would actually, delete this because it's a test record. But if I say I can't review this, the person isn't responding, I can't review it from the photo or no photo was used, but I don't want to delete it because, it could be that it's actually correct. We just can't identify it. I would go to review and don't release, and then I would click unable to confirm. So it's not deleted. Maybe it could be pulled back someday because, we can say, oh, we found out that this species has been here for 5 years and we didn't know it was here. You could go, okay, well, I can re-review this at a later time. And that's one thing I realized I didn't show is you can, again, I mentioned earlier about coming back to these records. If you come back to a record that's already reviewed, So let's just pick this one, see if it'll populate for me. Because I'm a system admin, I can see everything. So if I'm just going to pick this one. Someone said unable to confirm for this one. And so if I see this, my options change. Instead of the, ability to review the record, I can contest it. So this is one that was, unable to confirm. It would be it would look the same if it was already, reviewed in another way, but I can contest the review and re-review it. So I can come back to some of these unable to confirms later and change it from unable to confirm to say, okay, possible or credible based on information I got at a later time. If you discover that an iNaturalist observation imported into EDDMapS was misidentified, where does it make the most sense to correct it? iNaturalist, EDDMapS, or both? I would say at this time, both, if you're able to. Because we do on the iNaturalist records, if I go back here and I go to, well, here's an iNaturalist right here. If I click on this, there is a link to that exact record. So I can click on that, and honestly, I should have, opened it in a new tab, but I can, I do have an iNaturalist account. I can, say, oh no, this is actually sumac or whatever. And then I can go, here and I can say, oh, this is negative, it's correct, whatever, change the subject if I want to. And like I said, we do hope in the future to be able to have a check that we perform on a regular basis with the iNaturalist records to make sure that things aren't changing. So wow, okay. Any other questions? Matthew, I have 102 records that clog my feed. It is a bit, a bit frustrating when you've got records that, you want to get out of your review queue, but you couldn't review them. That's why we have unable to confirm as an option. So it's like, okay, it's out of my review queue. It's not deleted. I'm just, I'm just going to say unable to confirm for now because, again, 2018, 2012, we have some records from 2012 where people just, there wasn't enough information. So, yep, 2008, yeah, EDDMapS has been around for a few days. We were actually talking about how I think in a couple of years it'll be 20 years or 30 years. What was it, Chuck? 25 years?
Yeah, it should be. Now I just lost it. It should be 20 years. It was 2005, 2006 when we started EDDMapS. So
okay, so 2025, 2026. That'll be our big anniversary. So looks like I've cleared out the current questions. Anybody else have any other questions? And we mentioned it at the beginning, but this will be available on the training page. So if we go to training, you see that currently it's in the upcoming events. This will move to past office hours, and it will have the video of this training, these office hours. So if you click on that, it'll take you to the YouTube video for it. We're not going to have a December office hours. It's just a very busy time of year. There's a lot of people who use up their leave time in December. So we don't do December office hours. We will pick back up in January. You have our email addresses in the chat. So if you want to suggest a January or future office hours training, you can see what we've done in the past. You can let us know if you have an idea for the future. So thank you everyone for sticking around. We went a little bit over, but we did have some really great questions.
Yeah, y'all have a good weekend.